So, the Fed plans to destroy the middle class in order to make the rich richer. But before I explain why and exactly what you can do, you need to understand that this isn't the first time that this happened.
1980s, inflation was super high, so the Fed said, let's raise rates to stop spending and force the economy into a recession. Then President Reagan wanted to one-up the Fed to see who can screw over more people. So he cut social safety nets and gave tax cuts to the rich. And the result was surprisingly better than expected. Only half the incomes across the US fell, and only about 20% of the middle class went poof, all while the rich got richer. But it wasn't until the Great Recession that started the beginning of the end of the middle class. In 2008, the pattern repeats. The US economy collapses, the government gives billions to big banks to survive, despite being the ones that caused the problem. The labor, housing, and stock market tanks, leading to a 47% drop in median net worth and over 15% of Americans to fall below the poverty line, making middle class wealth go poof again. And since then, the wealth gap between the haves and the have-nots have reached the highest level ever recorded. But this isn't even the worst of it. You see, to save the economy, the Fed needs to make a hard choice. Sacrifice the rich or the poor through its economic policies. Inflation is currently the highest it's been since the 1980s, and the Fed decided to use the same exact plan to save the economy. Aggressively raise interest rates to tighten credit, force the economy into recession, and surprise, surprise, just like every other recession in the past, the middle class and the poor will bear most of the burden. But the scary part is, this time, it'll be far more brutal and miserable than ever before, because honestly, most of the middle class will not recover. Look, although the data shows that middle-income families did get wealthier the past few years, it didn't even come close to making up for the losses that they faced from the 2008 financial crisis. In contrast, upper-income families actually saw a 10% higher median net worth. And the terrifying part is the middle class is vanishing quicker than the value of Logan Paul's NFTs. Back in 1971, 61% of US adults belonged in the middle class. But as we go through time, that percentage falls to 52% in 2016. And now, even though the American middle class looks to be stabilizing right at the lower 50% range, the middle class continues to fall behind financially. 6 in 10 households do not have enough liquid assets to cover 3 months worth of expenses, which is bad news, because on average, recessions in the US last about 10 months. But let's stop being negative, Nancy, and look at the bigger picture. Maybe it'll paint a better story than the Twilight novels ever could, because the reality is middle-class families have assets beyond just what's in their bank accounts, like their net worth. So about 30 years ago, the middle 60% of Americans had double the net worth of the 1%, which makes sense. The majority of citizens should collectively have more wealth than just a select few. But then something happened. The rigged system has been working as planned, and the rich have been strategically taking advantage of every economic crisis, leading to, for the very first time in US history in 2021, the top 1% now owns more wealth than the middle 60%. Let that sink in. And this comes at a time when 75% of middle-class households say their income is falling behind the cost of living. The wealth gap in the US has changed so much the past few decades that even Webster Dictionary can't agree on how to define the middle class. For many years, the term middle class referred to Americans who successfully reached a version of the American dream, a stable income, a house, and a sense of financial security for the future. But that's no longer the case. Now, the middle class refers to people who can set up automatic payments to pay off their credit card debt. But what might even be a more important criteria is whether a middle-class American can still afford the 3 H's. And the scary truth is, the impending recession could be the final nail in the coffin that redefines the middle class forever. The first H, housing, and being able to afford a house was a key reality for the middle class just a few years ago. But now owning a home is more unrealistic than the movie scenes where they cook enough breakfast for 97 people on a Tuesday and no one ends up eating it. Seriously, I woke up at 2 a.m. to make all of this and you only grab a pancake? Get your ass back here. And this is only expected to get worse. In 1970, the median annual income was $9,870. The median house cost about $17,000, so about 1.7 times the median annual income. In 2022, however, the median annual income is $65,000, while the median house costs $428,700, about 6.5 times the median annual income. And while it is supernatural for prices to rise over time, the issue is that home values significantly outpace inflation, making it nearly impossible for new and young buyers to enter the market, which poses two massive problems. First, in the short term, the majority of America, the middle class, are getting priced out and are forced to pay too damn high rent, which adds to their already too damn high expenses. Second, in the long term, the wealth gap will get higher than Charlie Sheen because real estate is one of the fastest vehicles to grow wealth. And if only the rich can afford it, then the rich will get much richer faster. And all this is made much worse with the second H. About 40% of millennials who don't own homes say they can't afford one because of student loans, aka higher education. Look, it's no secret. Getting a higher education is now drastically more expensive, to the point that most students are forced to be riddled with debt just to get one, which is counterintuitive because an advanced society generally benefits from having an educated public, so we can avoid questions like this.
Is math related to science?
Average student loan debt in 1990 was about $18,000 adjusted for inflation, but by 2020, it doubled to $36,635, bringing the national student debt to over $1.7 trillion in 2020, when it was just $500 billion in 2006. And not surprisingly, the average American household income to debt ratio, basically how much you owe each month to how much you earn, is getting worse. In the 80s, the ratio hovered around 0.6, which meant that the middle class family making $100,000 has somewhere around $60,000 in debt. Now that ratio is just under 1, meaning the same exact family will have around $100,000 in debt. And over the past decade, most of this debt is because of higher education, but that might change to the third H, when the recession hits. Healthcare is a tricky expense because although medical costs also increase faster than inflation over the past 2 decades, chances are if you are a middle-class American, then your employer provides health insurance, which makes it decently affordable. And for now, the job market is still relatively strong, so most of us are safe. However, the concern here is when the Fed successfully forces a recession from raising rates, then millions of Americans will get smacked harder than Chris Rock and lose their jobs. The IMF predicts unemployment may reach 7.5%, or roughly 6 million people will lose their jobs, essentially forcing all these people to shop for new, more expensive health insurance, putting them at risk of financial jeopardy. Middle-class America is in a very bad place. 2/3 of Americans are digging into their savings just to pay for things. In 1985, the average major living expense for a family of 4, including housing, healthcare, transportation, and education, was around $13,227. The typical male worker needed to work about 30 weeks to cover this cost. But in 2018, the average major living expense is now $54,441, and the average male worker has to work 53 weeks to afford this. And there are only 52 weeks in a year. But it's not all doom and gloom, because at the same time, this recession creates a fantastic wealth building opportunity for you. And if it doesn't matter if you only have $1,000 or $1 million in savings, if you have the drive to build your wealth, you can get out of this recession with a new fortune. But before I show you what I'm doing to take advantage of this recession, I need to expose to you how the rich will use this economic crisis to get richer. And it's pretty wild. A secret most people don't know is that the wealthy make a lot of their money during a recession because of one simple reason. Asset prices from stocks to real estate typically crash during an economic crisis, and those with enough liquid cash can scoop them up at a discount. And what's absolutely wild is that the rich are already preparing for this massive buying opportunity. Big banks like Morgan Stanley and Bank of America have reported that rich Americans have been increasingly taking out a very, very special type of loan despite a looming recession. These special loans are called securities-backed credit lines, which basically means the wealthy are putting up their houses, their golden toilets, Balenciaga trash bags, or whatever as collateral to borrow lots of money at a much lower interest rate than people like you and me can get. And they're just silently waiting for the perfect time to scoop up discounted tangible assets like real estate, collectibles, and stocks. And the wild part is this. Think about who they will be buying most of these assets from. You, the middle class, the poor. It's no secret that the middle class and the poor are more likely to lose their jobs during economic crises than high-income earners. We saw this in the 1980s, in 2008, and even in 2020. The most vulnerable population feels the largest impact. So think about it. When the middle class lose their jobs and they can no longer afford their expenses, they will be forced to sell their assets, their houses, their cars, and stocks at a discount to survive. And the moment they put their assets on the market, the rich will be over there watching. waiting for a sale. But the most terrifying thing is this. The wealth inequality between the haves and the have-nots have widened so much that we are painfully unprepared. 70% of economists predict the US will go into a full-blown recession by 2023. And the truth is, you are running out of time. Which is why you need to watch this video right now to learn exactly what I'm doing and how you can come out of this recession with a new fortune.